It was a bright, sunny afternoon in the park. People were walking, chatting, and enjoying the warmth of the day. On a bench near a small fountain, an older man sat alone. His uniform, though slightly faded, still held a sense of dignity. He looked tired, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the area around him. His hands were folded in his lap, worn from years of hard work. The man looked like someone who had lived through a lot, but now he seemed content to simply rest. A few feet away, a younger man stood out in the crowd. He was loud, dressed casually, and carried himself with a certain arrogance. He glanced over at the older man on the bench, and couldn't resist making a remark. "Hey Grandpa," the younger man called out with a smirk. "You really still wear that thing? What's it, some kind of costume?" The Marine veteran didn't respond, his gaze never leaving the ground in front of him. The younger man, seeing no reaction, stepped closer, continuing to taunt him. "Must be nice to just sit there pretending you're a hero," the younger man sneered, louder now. The veteran remained silent. The younger man wasn't satisfied with the silence. He stepped even closer to the Marine veteran, his voice growing louder and more mocking. "Come on, don't act like you don't hear me," he said, a cocky grin on his face. "You were in the military, huh? Bet you were just some old guy who couldn't even keep up. What's the point of wearing that uniform now?" The veteran's face was unreadable, but his fists tightened ever so slightly. Still he didn't respond. "Seriously, look at you," the younger man continued, pointing at the veteran's uniform. "That thing is so out of date, it's a joke. You probably couldn't even remember which war you were in. Was it World War II? No, wait, that's too old for you, right?" Some people walking by glanced over, hearing the insults, but no one stopped. They looked uncomfortable, but no one stepped in. The park was still busy, but the atmosphere had changed. The younger man, seeing no one challenging him, pushed further. "You should just go home, old man. There's no place for people like you here. Nobody cares about your war stories anymore." The Marine veteran didn't flinch. His eyes remained fixed ahead, but his posture stiffened. His years of experience told him it wasn't worth responding. He'd heard worse before, during his time in battle, and the pain of those insults never truly went away. But the younger man wasn't done. He stepped in even closer now, towering over the older man. "What, you think you're tough? You're nothing but a relic. It's people like you who made this country a mess in the first place." The veteran's jaw tightened, but still no words escaped his lips. The insults kept coming, now louder and more venomous. The crowd grew more uneasy, but still no one intervened. The younger man smirked, convinced that the Marine was just too weak or too scared to fight back. As the words cut deeper, the Marine veteran kept his head down, pretending he didn't hear the venom in the younger man's voice. But deep down he knew things were about to change. Just as the younger man's insults began to grow harsher, a woman walked by and noticed the commotion. She was in her 40s, with a calm and confident presence. Her eyes immediately caught the situation, and she paused, observing the scene. She glanced at the Marine veteran on the bench, his back straight, but his expression unchanging. Then she looked at the younger man, whose arrogance was now in full force. Without a second thought, she approached them. "Hey, that's enough," she said, her voice steady and strong. The younger man turned to her with a scoff. "What's it to you, lady? You gonna defend this old man?" The woman didn't flinch. She stood tall, her eyes locked on the younger man. "You have no idea who he is, do you?" The younger man gave a dismissive laugh. "Who cares? He's just some old guy pretending to be a hero." The woman's expression softened, but her voice grew firm. "You think you know who he is, you have no clue." The younger man looked confused. He had thought the veteran was just some old man with a bunch of stories to tell. He was starting to lose his bravado as he realized people were watching, but he still refused to back down. "So what, you think I'm wrong about him? He's just a nobody." The woman shook her head slowly, her eyes never leaving his. "You don't know the half of it." She turned to the Marine veteran, then back at the younger man, her tone changing as she began to speak, her voice filled with pride. "That man you're mocking is not just anyone. He's a Marine who served in some of the toughest battles this country has seen. He's not just an old guy. He's a man who put his life on the line for this country, for people like you to stand here and say what you want without fear of consequence." The younger man's smirk faded as he looked from the woman to the veteran. The crowd around them, which had started to form, seemed to lean in, sensing something important was about to unfold. The woman continued, her voice unwavering. "He served in multiple combat zones, risking his life for people he didn't even know. He was there during some of the most brutal missions this country has ever faced, and he didn't do it for glory or recognition. He did it because it was his duty." The younger man's face began to change, the cocky expression slipping away as the weight of her words sank in. His earlier confidence was starting to crumble, but he wasn't ready to fully back down yet. "No way," he muttered. "You're saying he's some big war hero?" The woman didn't hesitate. "Yes, he's a hero, not just to this country, but to the people he saved, including me." The crowd quieted, and the younger man grew still. The woman went on, describing how the Marine veteran had saved her life during a dangerous mission. She spoke of the moment when they were both trapped under heavy fire, and how the veteran had carried her to safety, despite his own wounds. "He risked everything, and that's why he wears that uniform," she said softly. "He doesn't wear it for recognition or praise, he wears it because it's a symbol of what he gave. It's a part of him, just like the scars that no one can see." The younger man stood frozen, unable to speak. His bravado had disappeared, replaced by something else: guilt, confusion, and a sudden respect. He looked back at the veteran, who hadn't moved, hadn't said a word. The woman took a step back, glancing at the younger man one last time before she turned to leave. The crowd, now fully aware of what had just happened, watched in silence. No one spoke as the veteran sat still, his gaze still locked on the horizon. The younger man stood there, his mind racing. He wanted to say something, apologize, but the words wouldn't come. It was too late for that. The damage had been done. The younger man stood in stunned silence, the weight of the woman's words hanging heavily in the air. He glanced at the Marine veteran, who sat still, his face unreadable. For the first time, the younger man wasn't sure what to say. The cocky grin had disappeared, replaced by a knot in his stomach. He shifted uncomfortably, feeling the eyes of the crowd on him, some people nodding quietly, others shaking their heads. He glanced around, hoping to find some way out of this, but the truth was undeniable now. The older man wasn't just some figure in an old uniform. He was someone who had given so much, had risked his life for others, and here he was, sitting silently, while the younger man had been the one to insult him. The crowd began to disperse slowly, but the younger man remained rooted in place. He felt small now, the harsh words he'd thrown at the Marine echoing in his mind. His earlier bravado seemed ridiculous, childish even, compared to the reality of the situation. The insults, once sharp and biting, now felt hollow. The confidence he had in mocking the veteran was gone, replaced by a deep sense of regret. The woman had said the veteran didn't wear his uniform for recognition or praise. The younger man couldn't help but think about that. It made him realize how wrong he had been. He had thought that people like the Marine veterans were just stuck in the past, clinging to something that didn't matter anymore. But now, standing there, facing the reality of what the veteran had sacrificed, he could see how foolish he had been. He took a hesitant step closer to the Marine, unsure of what to do next. The veteran didn't acknowledge him, didn't even glance in his direction. The silence between them was thick. The younger man cleared his throat, trying to speak, but the words caught in his throat. "How do you apologize for something like that? How do you take back the things you've already said?" The younger man started, but his voice faltered. He shook his head, trying again. "I didn't know, I didn't mean." The Marine veteran didn't move, his expression didn't change. The younger man's words felt like they were falling short, like they could never undo the damage he had caused. The crowd had mostly dispersed now, leaving the two of them alone in the park. The younger man looked at the Marine one last time, but there was no response. The veteran's silence was both an answer and a punishment. The younger man didn't know what else to do. He felt small, humiliated, and ashamed of himself. As he stood there, unsure of what to say, or how to make amends. The weight of the situation finally hit him. It wasn't just about words, it was about understanding, respect, and recognizing the sacrifices made by others. The veteran had seen things the younger man couldn't even begin to imagine, and yet the only thing the younger man had offered him was ridicule. The younger man finally muttered something under his breath, his voice barely audible. "I'm sorry," he said, his words feeling weak and empty in the vast silence of the park. But the veteran didn't acknowledge him, and the apology seemed to fade into the air, lost and unspoken. The younger man slowly turned and walked away, his head down. He felt the sting of his own words still fresh, but he also felt something else, a sense of responsibility, of regret. He had a lot to think about, and the image of the Marine sitting silently on that bench would stay with him for a long time. The younger man walked away slowly, his steps unsure, his mind raced, but all he could think about was the Marine veteran. His face, his silence, and the weight of the words he had spoken earlier, mocking someone who had given so much. It felt wrong now, deeply wrong, but the veteran had said nothing, done nothing. The silence hung between them like a thick fog, almost as if the Marine had already forgiven him, but never bothered to speak it aloud. As he walked toward the exit of the park, he glanced back one last time, but the veteran remained seated on the bench, as if the world around him had disappeared. His back was straight, his posture unchanged. He was like a stone, solid and unmoving. It was a sharp contrast to the younger man, who felt like he was sinking deeper with every step. Behind him, the crowd continued to disperse. Some people were still talking in hushed tones, their conversations filled with judgment and disapproval. The younger man could hear the whispers, and he knew that he was the subject. But it didn't matter, the whispers were nothing compared to the feeling of guilt that weighed on him. A few moments later, the Marine veteran slowly stood up from the bench. His movements were deliberate and slow. He didn't look at the younger man as he walked past him, his eyes fixed straight ahead, his expression unchanged. The younger man tried to speak again, but the words wouldn't come. The veteran's steps echoed in the empty park, as he walked away, leaving the younger man standing alone in the quiet, feeling like the smallest person in the world.